Audio sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, I am super excited. Sean, I forget how long we've known each other, but have been dear friends with your wife for a long, long time. And I'm super excited to expose people to not only your idea and where you're at in your entrepreneurial journey, but also with everything that we've been doing with the podcast and all the different conversations we've had, feel like where you're at in the stage of things is really exciting. Given the fact that like entrepreneurship can sometimes feel like the biggest risk in the world, and then throw a pandemic on top of it, and it's no longer a risk, it's life and limb. But
for sure.
I'll give you a second, maybe talk about your background a little bit, but also give a quick definition of the business you're starting and why. What drew you to it?
Yeah. Well, yeah, perfect. I mean, it's kind of interesting what you said about, interested in the position I'm in, because I'm literally in my garage, starting this up. So it is definitely an interesting time with COVID hitting and everything like that. But the business that I'm looking to start it's a Nordic style bathhouse. The name of it would be Plunj. It's going to revolve around contrast therapy. Contrast therapy is kind of going in between hot and cold, moving your body in between those two extremes to gain the health benefits that come from that. That would kind of revolve around using a traditional Finnish sauna, mineral soaks, and a cold plunge. So that would be kind of the main gist of the business and what people would be coming to expect when they arrive. We'd offer, a handful of other items as well as kind of add-on treatments as far as massages and foot soaks and things like that. But that's kind of the basis of the whole company.
Okay, now I know something about your personal hobbies and background, but what would you say, and feel free to reference those for the audience, but like, what led you to this? Why did this become such a passion for you that you're like, yeah, I would leave an organization, a paycheck for this?
Yeah, well, it's funny because when I tell people that that I left a software company to start a cold plunge studio, they're kind of like, what? How does that even come about? For the last 3 or 4 years, I've really liked to trail run. And for those last 3 or 4 years, after my really long runs and after my intense training, I would go soak in the Provo River. I would, give myself an ice bath, because I found that the way that cold water interacts with the inflammation in my body did a lot of really good things. But on top of that, it just made me feel really good. Gave me a lot of energy.
You discovered this on your own, or at that point had you read some of the literature behind cold therapy?
At that point, I hadn't really read anything. I'd talked to people who were also runners that also did it, and so that's kind of why I started it. But it wasn't until about, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years ago, where I started seeing other benefits. My wife, she had really bad insomnia, and just at that time, coincidentally, we were reading a book, and it was all about kind of cold water therapy and how it helps with different stresses and anxieties and things like that. So we started taking cold showers together, and not only did it help her with her insomnia, but it also helped me a lot with my anxiety. I, over the last few years, have had different issues with anxiety, and it's helped curb a lot of those issues. So not only did I realize that it helped with a lot of my inflammation and stuff that I, do from an athletic standpoint, but it also helped with a lot of, it was kind of a really good mechanism to use towards de-stressing and kind of making me a less anxious person. And then it wasn't until a little bit later that we started thinking like, hey, like I would like to have a cold plunge of my own. I'm kind of tired of like going down to the Provo River and getting beer books from people as I'm, in the middle of February dipping into the river or whatever the case might be. And so I started looking into it, and I realized that cold plunges are not accessible to, the everyday person, and they're quite expensive. And not only that, but to go utilize one in a public place isn't accessible here in Utah at all, except for, really high-end spas that are really expensive. So I kind of got us started on this journey of trying to figure out a really a better way to make this accessible to the masses. And that's kind of what the vision is overall.
I love that, because like it's not just a passion for something that's going to sustain you through um, uncertainty and budgeting and logistics. It's the personal connection that you just described about you and your wife, right? That ultimately is the driver and a key part of finding that initial solution. I hesitate from saying just idea, but the problem that you're trying to solve, right? That is really awesome to hear. Like, it's not just the fact that you're an avid outdoorsman.
Yeah, there's a handful of different reasons why I want to start this. Number one, I mean, if I go back to the very beginning, it's because I want this accessible not only for myself, but I want other people to kind of experience it as well. I feel like that there's, in cultures all around the world, this has been something that's been implemented for thousands of years. If you go to Finland or Russia or Japan or Korea, even, a lot of these types of bathhouses and bathing rituals have been in practice for a long time, and then the benefits are well known there, but they're just not here. And I want to make sure that people can kind of bring those into their life if they want to.
Yeah.
And so it'd be more than just just a place for people to come dip in cold water, but I think it's a place for people to kind of come together. And I think, I mean, knowing that you've spent time in Finland, I imagine that you can see that around with people going to the saunas and how they treat that kind of culture over there.
The community aspect of saunaing is unreal. Like, I remember, as a side note, I was there as a church missionary, so we didn't really sauna and swim. But I remember going to an island in the summer with some women in our community, and it was sauna and lake all day. And there was no getting sick of it. And that community sense too is something that people are just starving for now. But I'd be interested to hear, I mean, you're talking about this being so prevalent across so many cultures. You've done your research, and you mentioned too that particularly the market in Utah where you're hoping to open a brick and mortar, there isn't something that provides that for people. What was the approach you took to market research, and how are you looking at, okay, yes, there's not something there, but how are you finding that maybe there's demand to support something even though it's not there yet?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think number one, when I first started looking into this, that was pretty much my first goal, to see what the demand is. And so kind of my first step was going out to see, are there places like this that exist anywhere in the United States? And so that was kind of my first job. And I went around and I found a handful of different places that exist in kind of the same way that I wanted to. And I spent some time talking it over with those owners and kind of going through and chatting with them about their experience and what they can see overall is the kind of the need or the want based off of their clientele and coming in. And then based off of that, I kind of spent a lot of time here in Utah with different user groups, finding those user groups through different methods of whether it be Facebook or Quora or just finding different people who are also into cold plunging or using a sauna and talking to them about it and getting introduced to other people. It's crazy the amount of people that I've come in contact through just one person. And just that one person has introduced me to another person and another person and another person. And it's been able to really give me a good idea and sense at what the pulse is on a lot of this. Now, that is me kind of driving towards my target audience. So I also spent some time with different side businesses that I think would also kind of lead into my same clientele, whether it be yoga studios or CrossFit gyms. And I've spoken with their owners and gotten time to speak with their clientele and talk to them about what I'm doing and if it's interesting, if they've ever done it, and what their experience is and what it, if they're interested in it. And overall, I've been really surprised by the amount of people who've actually heard of cold plunging or, sauna work and doing things like that with contrast therapy. But also the amount of people who are interested in trying it just never have.
Yeah.
Probably one of the biggest ones is maybe a lot of people listening to this have never heard of Wim Hof. If you haven't, I would definitely go and, check him out. That's a topic all of its own.
He's a funky dude.
But it's been, very funky. And it's been so interesting to talk to people and see how many people are, kind of know of what he's doing and like what that whole movement's about. And then it kind of cross-references into other areas and other businesses. And so it's given me a lot of really good ideas about partnership and things like that. So that was kind of my second phase, is going out and just trying to network and get a lot of information from people. And then apart from that, I've spent a lot of time sending out a survey to not only people who are familiar with the idea of contrast therapy. That was kind of my first step, was trying to get a lot of information from people who are familiar with it and how they feel about the business overall and the need for it. But then I also took that same survey and took it out to people who've never heard of it, and tried to get as many responses from people who've never heard of that to try and get their take on what something like this might look like. From an overall standpoint as well, there is research out there that talks about the growth of this particular niche in the health and wellness industry, how fast it's growing, the need for it within the United States. And then also there's a lot of really good public research about how Utah is one of those states that's kind of leading the charge with health and wellness and being at kind of the front of that. And so it's kind of all of those things mixed into one that has given me kind of the confidence and knowledge that, what I'm trying to do could be something that people would want to experience.
Yeah. And like, no matter how much data you have, at some point there still comes the tipping point where you just have to say, my passion overrides the state. You're not going to be irrational and say, I'm not acknowledging the data, that data's off, I'm still going to do it and make a poor business move. But all the data in the world doesn't take away the fear, right?
Yeah.
Or the
100%.
jitters. So, and this is really cool because right now, like for you, the rubber's really hitting the road, because this month has been the first month that plunges your sole focus. So what have been some of the initial steps now that it's really getting real? Have you looked into financing? How did that go? What did you bring to the table to get to that point? And what's the roadmap?
Yeah, that's been actually one of the most difficult parts about this, is because you spend so much time in the research and trying to figure out that if it is a good idea or not. But there's a lot of times that you kind of outthink your way out of making a lot of these, taking action and just taking a step forward.
I remember, side note, I mean, metaphorically speaking, right? We had a neighbor who needed to move their baby grand the other day, and there are 5 adults in the room. 5, Sean. And we're talking for like 10 minutes. It's not my house. So I was like, We're talking for like 10 minutes about moving the dang piano. And I'm like, how about we all just try, see what it's like, and move it? And of course, by the time we finally got everyone to get behind that and not worry so much about scratching the floor and not worry about not being able to do it. And of course, it was easy, but like, it's funny how that can take over in us sometimes, even with simple things like a piano, but even more so with starting a business, I'm sure.
Oh, 100%. It's funny you mention that, because in that situation, my natural response to the type of situation that we're talking about is, I'm the guy like, okay, well, let's make sure that like everything is covered so that we don't scratch the floor, and let's talk about what route we're going to take. And that's just my personality. And I've always been, somewhat risk averse. And so, actually just taking the action steps to get to the point where I feel like, that the rubber is actually hitting the road has actually been difficult. And I think me taking a step away from my full-time job was the first step in that direction of me just saying, okay, you know what, let's do this, and that alone was a really good catalyst for me to be like, okay, this is my focus. This is what I'm doing. It's giving me the confidence to kind of progress to a different state than I had before. Um, and like you said, you know, up until this point, it's mainly been doing a bunch of research, right? And I've I've also, kind of built out a framework of a website and, formulated my LLC and, registered myself with the state and all those things. And, there was a process getting to that as well, just understanding that I was, making all the correct steps in order to do that. But now it's kind of moving into the state of, okay, now I need to start looking for financing, and now I need to start, looking for a location. And now I really need to start thinking about my processes and procedures and what those are going to look like when my door is open. And with everything with COVID happening, those processes and procedures are going to even need to be more watertight, because I don't know how they might shift or change down the road in the future.
Yeah.
So what
Well,
I've been spending yeah, go ahead.
I might pause right there because I want to rewind a little bit, and if you don't mind, kind of shedding light a little bit on your most recent work experience, because 2020 has been a really dark and hard time for a lot of people. But it could be like 2008, right? Brought us so many new solutions and ideas and companies. And a lot of people, I mean, if you don't mind me just describing, if you're okay with that, but like you
Yeah.
approached your employer and said, hey, and this was before COVID, or before they were contemplating layoffs?
So it was actually before COVID. It was at the beginning of February, and
Okay.
things with COVID. There were rumblings, right?
Yeah.
Like it was still this virus in China that everybody was aware of. That none of us really thought it was going to affect us here. That's kind of
Yeah.
the state that we were at that point. And I went up to went into my boss, and I just kind of laid out a plan for him, told him, this is where my focus is going to be moving forward. I want to make sure that all of my clients are taken care of, and that I leave you guys in the best spot as possible. Because I really did enjoy the company that I worked for. I was a project manager for a company running large corporate events. And I really enjoyed the people that I worked with, and I enjoyed the clients. So I really didn't want to leave them in a bad position. So at that point, I kind of walked them through what my plan was and where I felt like things were going. And I said, okay, your events lead up until the end of May. Let's get through those events. That'll leave us plenty of time to train and to get people, ready to go. And then you can step away and, and start focusing on what you need to. But then it was in April. Sorry, it was March when,
Yep.
all of this really came down, and they had to make some big cuts. And they came to me and just asked, we were planning on this not happening until, May, but with everything that's happening, we'd like you to kind of accelerate your timeline, and let's get people trained now so that at the beginning of May that, we're ready to go.
Yeah.
And so, I took that step, and honestly, it was super scary, but it's been a really good step for me.
Yeah. I wanted you to touch on that a bit more, just because it seemed to have been, I mean, you had a timeline before, which it'll be so interesting to end up hearing stories a year or two from now of businesses that come out of this as a result of this, and hearing these startup stories, right? And how many of them share your experience, or even how many of them, due to the shove out the door, were like, well, crap, I got to figure something out. But either way, right? Like, this affected you in that manner, and maybe it did help. It was the kick in the pants, like, Sean, you've been talking about this. You've been doing all your research. Let's get to it. So now you're there. We were just about to kind of get into financing stuff, or like even just your roadmap. Like, what are you hoping for this year? Like, are you hoping to open a location, especially with COVID? What are your thoughts around that?
So, I mean, kind of going back to what you said, I think that, necessity is one of the greatest drivers of innovation and growth, right? So I
Yeah.
think that, you know, I kind of purposely put myself into that situation. It happened a little earlier than I thought. But I feel like that for a lot of people, that's going to be a great spur to like really get them going and get them moving into the direction that they want to go in. As far as my roadmap, I would love to open this year. I would love to open in the fall. With everything that's happening, who knows if that's actually going to be a possibility or not. There's still a lot of unknowns of what that looks like, especially in the industry that I'm trying to go into. But right now, my main focus is on trying to secure the funding that I need so that, when it comes time, I'm able to take action on a real estate piece that I really like, or making sure that I can get the equipment that I need when I need to get it, and that I can do so like quickly.
Yeah.
And kind of having all of those ducks in a row. So right now is kind of that time for me to organize all of those items in line so that I can be prepped for when those kind of dominoes fall. So right now it's for me, it's kind of going, financing first, and then it's going to be location and then permitting. Those are kind of the main three on my plate right now. And each one of those are going to present challenges that I don't think that I've foreseen yet. And so just trying to get my head around that and trying to take steps towards what that might look like. As far as, for some businesses, unlike mine, I think there's a lot of businesses you may need to go out and find, capital, from different people, investors, partners, whatever the case might be. For me, I kind of made the decision that especially with this first location, I want to try and hold it myself. So what does that look like? Am I going to go out and try and find, how am I going to leverage the assets that I currently have to try and get the money that I need to start the business that I want? Does that mean that I take out personal loans and place other assets on the line? What are the pros and cons of each of those?
Yeah.
And if once you get to that point, if that's not working, okay, then what does it look like if I take investors on? What is that going to do to my business? For my particular business, which, in the health and wellness industry, it's kind of a lifestyle business. How interested are a lot of investors going to be in putting in money to that? And maybe it's getting creative with the way that you raise money, with crowdfunding, whatever that might be. But I think the sooner that you can kind of nail down and understand what kind of financing you want to go after, and then putting time towards making sure that you can make that happen, it's going to make everything everything else fall into line.
Yeah. I think a crucial part of that too, though, is having, and maybe I'm putting you on the spot right now, but having a pitch nailed down to be able to emotionally communicate to an investor, potential investors, what it is you're doing and why they should care and why they should put money on the line. Have you nailed one down? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, no, and I think it's really interesting because I've never considered myself to be any sort of great salesman, right? And I think
it's a different skill.
100%. And I feel like that one day it's going to come to the point, and I'm hoping that this is the case, that I need to go out and find capital to maybe start a second location, or to do something else with my business that currently isn't in the works for me right now. And what I'm really hoping is that the network that I tie into now will give me a really good base understanding of, okay, these are the people that I can target for, my pitch, right? So personally, I think that dialing in a network and really developing a network of people that you can reach out to is really important, maybe even more so important than the pitch itself, because I think that having that relationship with certain people is going to put you ahead quicker than any 1 minute elevator pitch will do. So I think that having those contacts and having,
and them seeing your history, your capabilities, that even if your 1 minute elevator pitch falls flat, they can be, okay, but I know Sean.
Yeah, exactly. And it's been really interesting because I've spent a lot of time talking to a lot of those people whom I would consider, to be potential future investors. And I've kind of approached them with the mindset right now of, hey, this is an idea that I have. I want your feedback. And I'm not necessarily going into any of these meetings asking for any money, asking for nothing but their opinions and their feedback and what they think and feel about the business overall. And most of them have come back and they're all really excited about it. But the best thing is that a lot of these people, they all have so much experience starting businesses and so much knowledge and doing what I'm trying to do. They've done it 10 times over. So when they're reading through my business plan or they've heard my pitch and my approach, they can poke holes in it. And that's the kind of people that you kind of want to look for, because you want people who can poke holes in your business idea and say, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Your numbers here are looking way too slim and you need to really bump those up. And that's been extremely helpful for me. And so I'm hoping that when it comes time for me to have to give, a more intense pitch to a lot of those people, they'll know that I put the work in, they'll know that I put the time in, they know that I have an understanding of what I'm trying to do in the industry that I'm trying to make, an effort in, and they'll take a lot of that into consideration along with just what the business idea is. So to kind of like dial that all in, I think that nail down a pitch and nail down what you want people to know about your business, but also spend just as much time, if not more, trying to make connections with people who you think could be potential future investors. Yeah, exactly.
And maybe they don't back you, but they buy into your idea enough and know you well enough that, again, it can make up for any lack of articulation, that they can connect you with someone who would.
Yeah, exactly.
Financially back you. Yeah. No, I like that call. I wasn't expecting that. So what's next for Plunge? Like, what gets you waking up every morning excited to go to your garage?
Right. This might sound like super cheesy, but I think up until this point, I've always, I've had great jobs for great companies. And up until this point, it's never been about something that's passionate, that I've been passionate about and spreading to others. And that's really what's driving me more than anything, is that I am super excited to introduce this to people. I'm super excited for people to really understand what kind of an effect it can have on their life. And that more than anything, just that excitement of even just right now, I've spent a lot of times with friends and family, like, hey, you want to do this? Let's go. I'll take you up to the river right now. We can go up to this lake. Let's try this out. I can show you some breathing techniques. Let's kind of, explore this together a little bit. And that's given me a lot of energy, and it's been a lot of fun kind of guiding people through that. And it makes me so excited to do that on a mass scale with a lot of people who have never even heard of this before. And I'm just extremely excited for somebody to be scrolling through their Instagram feed and see a picture of the space that I want to build and be like, oh, that looks really cool. I wonder what that's all about. And then kind of dive into a little bit more, and then come to realize, like, oh man, like this could be really helpful to me because of whatever their situation is, and kind of coming in to learn that it can be something that could really help them and make them feel better about whatever is happening in their life.
Yeah, I mean, there it is again, right? That personal connection and experience that you and your family have had with it, that is so key to sticking with an idea beyond any road bump. Every business will have its times where it's like, we're 48 hours away from shutting down. But that passion fuels you to get scrappy in those moments, right? And
100%.
And you haven't opened yet, but that's the passion that keeps you going to open. And I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited. We're going to chat again in 6 months. Okay.
Well, let's do it.
Okay. It's funny. I remember seeing a quote recently by Bill Gates. Let's hope I get it right. That went something like, we often overestimate what we can do in a day and underestimate what we can do in a year. And it'll be cool because like you're gonna experience those days, day after day for the next 6 months. But we're gonna come in and check in on you, and we're gonna be like, holy, look at what Sean did, and not just in COVID, but it's gonna be. I'm excited. So put that date on your calendar because we're going to follow up.
Well, see, now I have something to be accountable for. So, that's just driving me even more. I'm hoping that next time we talk, you can actually come into the space and we can be chatting amidst, everything else. Maybe we'll have a nice little podcast session in the sauna. Who knows, right?
There you go. Done. Okay, so 6 months, we'll come back and talk to you. In the meantime, and it'll be interesting to see how your 3 takeaways change. But what are your 3 takeaways for budding entrepreneurs, people within an organization who are looking to start a movement? Yeah. Yeah,
no, I think so. We kind of talked about all 3 of these during our conversation. And I think number 1 is just act, right? Like, I love that quote by Bill Gates that you referenced. And I would just say, write down 3 things that you can do in the next week that will kind of get you started. Whether that's as simple as like, making a few phone calls or, starting your business email inbox or whatever that is, right? Make those 3 goals, because I feel like that once you start doing 1 or 2 things and they kind of have a snowball effect and you start to realize like, okay, things are moving.
Yeah.
So that's my first thing is I would just say act.
Well, and if you've read Atomic Habits, I love what James Clear says about things like this, where it's often the entry point that is the hardest. Let's say your room's a disaster. It's going to take you hours to clean it. You set a timer for 10 minutes. And likelihood is you're going to clean longer than 10 minutes, right? And it's that same concept. It's the entry point. It's the starting that is the hardest thing to do. But then you get that ball rolling and it's that snowball down the hill and it accumulates and gets bigger and bigger. And before you know it, you're going pretty fast.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think that, and trust me, coming from somebody who has a hard time getting the ball rolling sometimes, like that would be my number 1 thing for anybody that wants to start a business is just start somewhere, right? Start anywhere. And the quicker you start, the quicker you're going to understand, yes, this has legs or this doesn't have legs. And so just start somewhere, right? That'd be my number 1 thing. My number 2 thing would be, research. There's not only about your customers, which is obviously the most important, because without profit or anything like that, then, you don't have a business. But there are so many other things that require research beforehand, and things that I think have helped me have a good idea of what might be coming. For example, I've done a lot of research into what kind of cold plunge I want in my space, because that's kind of the focal point of everything. And I learned quickly that, they're really expensive, and, they have a really high barrier of entry. So I started to do a lot of research, and I found that the only reason that's the case is because there's not a lot of people creating. And I found that I could create mine dissimilar as other people's, for a lot less. And so through my research, I've kind of come up with a way that I'm going to be able to cut my costs substantially through that research that I did. And so there's little things like that where I think that no matter if you're going into e-commerce or a services industry or a software industry, the more research you can do on the little intricacies of your business and not just write it off as like, oh, this is going to cost me a lot of money. I think the better off your business is going to be overall, because you're going to have a lot better understanding of what you're getting yourself into overall.
Yeah.
And I think that could be true with anything you're doing.
Yeah, it's not just about necessarily bringing an offering into a space that doesn't have that offering, but there's still room for creativity. It's not just bringing the mousetrap to a field ridden with mice. It's bringing a more efficient mousetrap too. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest things that draws me to entrepreneurship in the first place is I love to create things, right? You and I both really love to cook, and that's the reason that I love to cook, because I like to create things, and that's why I like to build things with my hands. And so I think that really leaning into that research portion and finding ways to create outside of, what's been the norm in whatever industry you're going in will kind of help you give a leg up. And I'm hoping that that'll be the case with me.
Yeah. And what's your last one?
I think the third one would definitely be going back to the network. I think it's really important to spend a lot of your time trying to meet people, and that comes from an introvert. I am, I love my tight knit group of people, and I rarely step out of that. And it's a really good exercise for me to put myself in situations where I'm talking to people that I've never met, talking to people who are extremely successful, and having to have a conversation with them about this business idea that I have. And not only is it giving me the experience in pitching out those ideas, but I feel like that doing that is going to set me up for the long term, like we talked about earlier on, hopefully.
Yeah, those are really good ones. I liked the specific twist you put on network too. It's not just about, well, the fact that it can make up for your weaknesses, right? Because as an entrepreneur, you gotta work with what you got. The hand you're dealt, the personality you've got, the experience you've got, and then you lean on that network to help you out where you might fall short. And that's okay. It's okay to fall short. But recognizing that and knowing that there are lots of people out there who are probably just as passionate, or could be just as passionate if they only knew about it. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Cool. Well, thanks, Sean.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to that episode of We've Connected. Make sure to hit subscribe down below so you get notified of any time we add a new episode. We'll catch you next time.